today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. The latest set of updates to the women's Ring IQ pound-for-pound list based on this weekend's action. Katie Taylor's upset loss to Chantel Cameron in her native Ireland. This one hurt a bit. Katie Taylor's one of my favorite fighters. And by strength of merit, not preference, strength of merit, she has sat atop the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list for some time now. But unfortunately, the rules apply to her the same way they apply to anyone else. No fighter coming right off a loss is allowed to maintain a rank, and as a result of that, Katie Taylor is ejected from the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list until further notice. All those ranked behind her move up one spot, making Amanda Serrano, who was previously ranked at number 2, number 1 on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. And the hierarchy of thought, the logic behind that rule, is simple. We don't know that this isn't the beginning of the end for Katie Taylor, an inconvenient truth. We don't know that this isn't the start of a downward spiral for Katie, that perhaps moving forward, she's no longer competing at the same level that got her on the list in the first place. Thus, in order to get back on, she's got to get back in the winner's bracket. She's still a champion. She's still an undisputed lightweight champion. And if she were to win her very next fight, her rematch with Chantel Cameron, she would be reintegrated into the list. But until that happens, until she can prove that she still got it, Amanda is number 1 and Clarissa is number 2. Chantel Cameron, the woman that beat her, she moves up from the number 4 spot to the number 3 spot. She's number 3. You may be thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute. Wait. If Chantel Cameron actually beat Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano didn't, why is Amanda ranked ahead of Chantel? It's because Chantel doesn't have Amanda's body of work. One lone victory won't give her that. The pound-for-pound list is more of a marathon than a sprint. It's not as simple as saying Katie was number 1 and Chantel beat her, so that makes Chantel number 1. Dimitri Bivol wasn't rated the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport when he beat Canelo. Sorung Visai wasn't rated the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport when he knocked out Chocolatito. It's not as simple as saying that because you beat the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter, that makes you number 1. There are other elements that need to be accounted for. That doesn't give you the same body of work that they had, and that doesn't give you the same body of work of those that are ranked ahead of you. And beating Katie Taylor, which is a great win, Chantel gains ground. She moved up from number 4 to number 3 by way of the process of elimination. But that doesn't mean she beat 4 reigning champions like an Amanda Serrano and took their belts. That doesn't make her a 7-division champion like Amanda, or a 3-time undisputed champion like Clarissa Shields. The saving grace is that Chantel's not far behind. She's right behind them, gaining ground, adding to her legacy, and strengthening her argument for the future that perhaps one day she will be the number 2 or number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport. But I say it all the time, becoming the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport really is more of a marathon than a sprint. It can't be relegated to just one major victory, one significant win. The fighter that Chantel beat was a 2-division champion, whereas Chantel herself, she's only been a champion at 1 weight. Clarissa's been a champion in 3, and Amanda's been a champion in 7. There is more work needs doing for Chantel to catch up to those fighters and what career accolades they have amassed so far. Now, beating Katie Taylor again at lightweight as opposed to super lightweight, where Katie's an undisputed champion, that will further strengthen Chantel's argument if she can take Katie Taylor's belts from her. All she did this past weekend was defend her own. The same applies to Katie, too. If Katie can defeat Chantel and get back in the winner's bracket, successfully defend her alphabet titles at lightweight, she'll be back on the list, and it'll be Chantel that gets bumped off. So I reiterate, she has to get back in the winner's bracket, because we don't know that this isn't the beginning of a downward spiral. We don't know that Father Time hasn't finally caught up to Katie, and she can't compete at the level she was competing anymore. She needs to get back in the winner's bracket to show that she's still got it, and she'll get back on the list. I understand that Katie Taylor's got one of the best resumes in the sport. I understand that at least 2 fighters on this list were beaten by Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano, Natasha Jonas.
That's her track record, though.
Past tense, that's her track record. That's what she's already done. What can she still do? Because that's just as important.
The list itself attempts to gauge at what level you're competing at now, and I can't bend the rules based on preference. I didn't in the past, I'm not about to now.
Not about to start, and as a result of the vacancy that Katie Taylor's absence creates, Jessica Neri Plata of Mexico, unified light flyweight champion. She emerges on the list for the first time at number 9, ahead of Texas's own Marlena Esparza.
They're both unified champions.
And the both of them beat 2 world champions apiece. What separates them is points for style.
Jessica Neri Plata beat both Kim Clavel and Jessica Bopp a bit more emphatically than, say, Marlena Esparza. Her victory over Beth Zamora Silva and Naoko Fujioka.
Marlene's fights were a lot closer than Jessica's. So close that some people weren't really convinced that she beat Naoko, and they weren't really convinced that she beat Beth Zamora Silva. She got the decision, though not emphatically.
Jessica's victories over Kim Clavel and Jessica Tuti Bopp, they were more convincing.
At least more convincing than Marlene's victories. So, Jessica Neri Plata emerges at number 9 on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list, and Marlena Esparza, she stays at number 10.
Those are the latest updates on the Women's Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. Let's see if Katie can't get herself back in the winner's bracket and get back on.
In men's welterweight news, more tidbits in reference to the recent announcement late yesterday that Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. had agreed to terms and they're going to be fighting in late June. It's in keeping with everything that I've been hearing and everything I've been talking about here on the channel, how this fight needs to happen for more reasons than one. It's not just the fighters that need this fight, it's the platform that's set to air it. Showtime. They need numbers, and to get numbers, they need big fights. This is the biggest fight you can hope to make in the men's welterweight division, and you will notice that in this set of negotiations, unlike the previous one, both fighters are being guaranteed cash. They're getting guarantees. Late last year,
the story on both sides, both the Errol Spence side and the Crawford side, was there were no guarantees to the fighters. They were going to get paid off the net. Terrence Crawford was intended to trust Errol Spence Jr.'s handlers.
Trust Errol Spence, trust Al Heyman, trust the PBC that there wouldn't be any funny business.
Many debates amongst the separate factions of fans about how Terrence wasn't being given full transparency.
Though I suppose it's neither here nor there, because Terrence Crawford, in his own words, in his 20-some-odd minute tell-all video, he said that he accepted their terms. He accepted their offer, but they wanted to move the fight to the following year.
That's what he said.
And on that premise, Terrence was insistent that he take a tune-up fight, a keep-busy fight, because he didn't want to go all of last year without having a fight. He was told by Al Heyman that if he did this,
Errol was going to move on, that he'd move on and he'd fight Keith Thurman for 7 figures.
According to Terrence, that's what Al Heyman told him. Time has proven him wise. It would have been unwise for a fighter his age, in his mid-30s, to go the entirety of last year without seeing any action, any real action at all under the hot lights. Even if it was just a David Avanesian fight, it was a fight.
He still had to do a camp for it. He still had to make weight, and he still had to secure the W. Making weight perhaps being the most relevant part of that.
It hasn't been a year and a day since Terrence Crawford had to make welterweight, but Errol can't say the same. It's been a little over a year since he fought Yordenis Ugas in their unification match. If the fight is set to go down in July, late July going into August, it's well over a year since Errol had a fight.
I don't see the virtue in that.
Some may cite that the time off may have been beneficial to Errol, allowing him to further heal from what injuries he sustained in the car accident late 2019, the eye retina injury in 2021, that this time off might have been beneficial towards his recuperation, though not his sharpness, not his ability as a fighter. The more you do something, the better you get at it.
Two things can be true at the same time. Based on his injuries, yeah, maybe he did need time off.
Maybe there was a benefit to that, but the caveat is the more time you're off, the less time you're fighting, the less sharp you become over time. And Errol Spence Jr., in his own words, he didn't want any tune-up fights.
That's what the Thurman fight would have been. Killing 2 birds with 1 stone. It would have been a tune-up fight. Today's Keith Thurman is little more than a tune-up fight for the top guys, but he also doubled as Errol Spence Jr.'s mandatory challenger by way of the WBC, and the WBC's not applying any pressure on Errol to fight that guy.
Not that I'm complaining. I'd prefer that they keep the way clear for this fight between unbeaten champions, because it's about time.
It needs to happen.
This fight is more important than any one mandatory, any lone mandatory by any lone alphabet organization.
But like I said, there are differences, nuances in between this set of negotiations and what we saw last year. Last year, there were no guarantees to the fighter. How do you expect to make a fight like this?
In this day and age, it's a standard practice that the fighter gets some kind of a guarantee, let alone a guarantee for what's supposed to be a big fight, a major pay-per-view.
It's supposed to be a guarantee, especially when you hail this guy as the biggest name in the welterweight division.
At one point, they were trying to say that Errol Spence Jr. had usurped Canelo Alvarez as the top-earning fighter in the face of boxing in this country. Well, and where the hell was the guarantee?
Errol Spence Jr.'s supporters were actually trying to justify there not being a guarantee for the fighters, even though that's not the standard practice.
Now, lo and behold, the money emerges. After the success that Showtime just had with the Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia fight, one can speculate that perhaps that box office fight created a surplus of cash that the people at Showtime are perhaps using to bankroll this fight, or maybe the people at Showtime, the higher-ups, the guys above Stephen Espinosa's pay grade, based on the success of that fight, were willing to release more cash for this one.
Maybe. Or maybe last year they'd burned through their annual budget.
Maybe, and maybe they needed to wait till the following year for the annual budget to be replenished.
Renewed.
It's all open to interpretation, though if nothing else, we know that last year, and it was confirmed on both sides, there were no guarantees to the fighters, whereas this year, that's not the case.
Surely you can see the virtue of the fighters actually having guarantees, and that going a long way towards getting the deal done, smoothing things over.
Terrence Crawford got a lot of criticism for that David Avanesian fight late last year, but time has proven him wise because he's fought in the last 12 months. Errol hasn't.
And he's left little room for excuses.
That he didn't want a tune-up fight, so if he loses, if he falters in late July,
there are no excuses to make.
And finally, based on this weekend's action, the people at World Boxing News have elected to move Vasyl Lomachenko ahead of Devin Haney on their respective pound-for-pound list. We know that many periodicals keep a pound-for-pound list of their own. You've got yours, and I've got mine.
World Boxing News has Vasyl Lomachenko ranked ahead of Devin Haney on theirs, and their rationale is simple.
They're not going to allow Devin to gain ground on their list for a victory they don't think he deserved. They think Vasyl Lomachenko earned that victory.
They've moved Loma ahead of Devin over there at Yahoo Sports. There's a very similar sentiment. They've dropped Devin from their pound-for-pound list entirely.
Kevin Iole, senior boxing and mixed martial arts columnist, stated, Devin Haney's so-so win costs him top 10 spot.
You mean that all these periodicals don't think it was an emphatic victory?
Not according to Kevin Iole. According to Kevin, he was hardly impressive, especially against the 35-year-old who had not fought to his normal high standards in his last few bouts. It was hard to watch the fight and not think about what would have been happening if it were Shakur as Stevenson in there instead of Lomachenko, as Stevenson at this age is significantly more advanced and likely would have won in a walk. So after much pondering, I've decided to drop Haney out of the top 10.
I've been saying it since Saturday. Not everybody's convinced that Devin Haney won that fight, and even some that are, they are hardly impressed. It's not the dominant victory that Devin Haney's fans are making it out to be. If it were, why would this be the reaction?
They're going to say people are sentimental about Vasyl Lomachenko. They're going to say he's the media darling. But what does the media have to do with what the actual fighters are saying? Fighters like Blair Cobb
calls it a hard robbery.
Let me tell you something about the world of boxing. In the world of boxing, people hardly agree on anything. But when it comes to Saturday's decision, an overwhelming amount of people in the industry and outside of it all agree.
That was a robbery.
Can the Loma fan narrative or the media darling narrative, there are many fighters that feel the right man didn't win the fight. Fighters like Terrence Crawford and Shakur Stevenson, Keyshawn Davis, Regis Prograis, Sean Porter, Jared Anderson,
Jorge Linares.
They don't think the right man was given the decision. They don't think the right man won the fight. Zarina McCoy,
she thinks Loma won.
So does Blair Cobbs. Blair Cobbs, who's been echoing a very similar sentiment that I've been saying here on the channel. This was a robbery. A clear robbery.
Yes.
A hard robbery.
Yes.
Spare me the gaslighting. You're trying to pretend like that was a clear-cut victory, a clear win for Devin Haney, and if it were, we wouldn't be seeing all of this. We wouldn't be seeing all of these pros and all of these pundits, all of these people saying the opposite. If you think Devin Haney won clearly, you're in the minority, my friend.
Joe Calzaghe thinks Vasily Lomachenko deserved the victory. You gonna tell him he don't know shit about boxing?
But you do, and that's why you scored it for Devin Haney.
I can only tell you what I think.
And if you want to know what I think, and you're here, so I'll assume that you do, that was a fucking robbery.
That's why people are reacting this way. The pros, the pundits, the people.
Not a big deal. Not the first time I seen a guy get robbed in the sport of boxing. Won't be the last.
But that's what it was. It was a robbery. Most people agree.
If you're one of these guys saying it doesn't matter because the judges gave it to Devin, then don't let that bother you. Don't let the overwhelming number of professional boxers and boxing pundits, don't let those people calling this a robbery bother you if all you care about is the judges' scorecard.
As far as you're concerned, the judges got it right.
What are you arguing for? What, you getting mad at me that I'm talking about it? That I'm talking about how both Yahoo and World Boxing News...
Devin has lost ground in their pound-for-pound list.
Because according to them, his quote-unquote victory, if you even want to call it that, wasn't convincing. Wasn't as convincing as you might think it is. But if you're convinced, then you're settled.
What are you still arguing for?
You want I should not talk about it? You want I shouldn't bring it up? I should just move on? It's in the fucking news!
It's not like we're talking about a fight from 2-3 months ago. It was 2-3 days ago.
You just don't like that you're in the minority. You just don't like that you yourself can conduct an independent poll right now via any social media platform, and most people that participate won't agree with you. You just don't like your bubble being burst.
Not the first time I seen a guy get robbed. Guys get robbed all the time in the sport of boxing.
This is just another robbery to me, but you're mistaken if you think I'm going to classify it as anything other than a robbery.
It's a robbery.
Pseudo-intellectual arguments about going back and rescoring the fight. Why would I go back and rescore the fight? So I can find rounds to give to Devin?
I had it 8-4 Lomachenko the night of the fight. The same as Shakur Stevenson, the same as Oscar De La Hoya.
I hear a lot of people saying that there are no robberies in close fights, but that implies that the fight was close at all. I don't think it was close. I had it 8-4.
Wasn't close to me.
If you thought it was,
You're in the minority.
and because you're in the minority, you're going to keep hearing about how this was a robbery, because most people don't feel how you feel.
Robbery!
To this day, people are still calling Chavez versus Whitaker a robbery. You think they're gonna let up on this? This was just 3 days ago.
You say they'll get over it.
Of course they will, but that doesn't mean they'll stop calling it a robbery. They're still gonna call it a robbery, you know.
You'll still be in the minority.